My hands were shaking as I frosted the cake. It wasn't from the cold, but from the way my son looked at me earlier like I was a cracked vase he didn't want to fix. Just something small this year, David had said, barely glancing up from his phone. No need to fuss. I nodded then. But now, standing in my own kitchen, I couldn't help but fuss. 68 birthdays, and this one felt heavier than most. I lit the candles anyway, even though no one would care. I told myself it wasn't about the it was about tradition. The door opened. Marissa was first to walk in, purse in hand and already on her phone. Hope this won't take long, she muttered. We've got Ellie's violin practice at 7. David followed. He kissed my cheek, mechanical and quick. Happy birthday, Mom. Thank you, sweetheart, I whispered. Ellie gave me a warm smile. Hi, Grandma. At least she meant it. We sat down. I served slices of cake, poured tea, and waited for someone to say something meaningful. Instead, the conversation shifted to cruise deals, kitchen remodels, and David's new golf clubs. I cleared my throat. I was thinking I might finally take that trip. The one I've always talked about. Europe, maybe Italy, maybe more. David blinked, then snorted. What trip? Mom, you can barely lift your carry-on. You can't travel alone. Marissa didn't even look up. Do you even have a passport? Ellie raised her eyebrows, sensing something shift. I forced a smile. Yes, I do. I've had one since I was 45, never used it, but I have it. Marissa laughed. That thing's probably expired. David shook his head. Mom, be serious. You need supervision, not souvenirs. I swallowed my pride. With my cake, I just thought I'd like to see something beautiful, once. Before, you've got photos on Google, he interrupted, and there's a documentary on Netflix about Italy. I looked down at the frosting on my plate. Pink roses, handmade, pointless. No one noticed when I stopped talking. No one asked about my dream. No one believed I could do it. Later that night, when the dishes were clean and the house was empty again, I sat in the quiet with nothing but the clock ticking above the sink. I opened the drawer next to the couch and pulled out the old leather pouch. My passport tucked in a sleeve. Still valid, still blank. Just like me. There was something sad about a passport with no stamps, like a story never told. I traced the edges of it with my finger and thought about Florence, the cobblestone streets, the churches, the gelato Ellie once read about in school. Then I imagined Paris, maybe Berlin, maybe Morocco. But mostly, I imagined silence that wasn't filled with judgment or being dismissed, like furniture in someone else's living room. I reached for the postcard I'd kept from a thrift store visit 5 years ago, a dusty picture of the Eiffel Tower. I'd almost thrown it out a dozen times. Tonight, I turned it over and began to write. To me, I scribbled, you are not invisible, you are not useless, you are still becoming. My fingers shook, not from age, but from the spark that lit somewhere deep inside. They laughed. They said, I couldn't. They think I won't, but I will. The next morning, I opened the curtains and let the light spill in like I hadn't done in months. My knees ached, but something inside me was wide awake. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the passport again. I remembered the day I got it. It was after Harold passed. I told myself, one day, Martha, one day you'll use it. I was 5. Life stretched out in front of me like an open road, but one thing came after another. David's college, his wedding, the mortgage, then Ellie, then I became grandma, and not much else. Dreams don't die fast, they starve. That passport sat untouched while I cooked, cleaned, babysat, and aged into someone nobody listened to. And the cruelest thing was when I finally said I wanted to go. The people I loved laughed. I picked up my phone and called David. He answered with, Hey Mom, everything okay? I hesitated. I meant what I said last night about traveling. I want to go. I've saved. I've done everything for everyone else. I just want something for me now. There was a long pause. Then his voice changed. Mom, don't be ridiculous. You're not 20. What happens if something goes wrong over there? Do you even know how to use your phone outside the country? I can learn, I said, voice shaking. Learn, he scoffed. Mom, this is dangerous. People like you older, people get robbed, lost, or worse. You're being selfish. Selfish, I whispered. After everything I've done for this family, I'm just being realistic. You're not equipped for this. That's not me being mean, that's just facts. He hung up before I could respond. I sat there, stunned, like I'd asked to be buried instead of set free. Maybe he really didn't see me anymore. Maybe I was invisible, but not to me. That night, after another meal eaten in silence, I sat with my laptop open. The cursor blinked on the travel site like it was daring me to do it. Rome, Florence, Venice, 7 nights, 1 seat left. My finger hovered. My heart thumped. Click, book now. The confirmation page loaded like a door opening, and I let out a sound between a sob and a laugh. I hadn't even packed yet, but I was already gone. I leaned back in my chair and looked around the room. Photos of David's wedding. Drawings Ellie made when she was 5. My late husband's fishing hats still on the hook by the door. They thought I couldn't do this. They forgot who raised them. I pulled out a stack of old postcards I'd collected from yard sales, dusty souvenir shops, and mailboxes that never sent anything back. One for each place I'd never been. But now, I'd use them all, and every single one would carry a message to David, to Marissa, to Ellie, to myself. A slow smile crept over my face. They didn't believe I could travel alone. Fine, let them open their mailboxes. Let the truth arrive in ink and foreign stamps. The air in Florence smelled like espresso and old stories. I stepped off the shuttle from the airport, gripping my purse like a lifeline. My knees hurt, my back complained, but my heart was full. The city moved around me fast, loud, alive. Mopeds zipped past ancient buildings. Church bells rang in the distance. A man shouted in Italian as pigeons scattered from a bakery window. Never felt so out of place, and never more alive. I checked into a tiny guest house owned by a woman named Rosa, who spoke no English but smiled like she knew me. She handed me a brass key and pointed up a narrow staircase. The room was simple. A window with shutters, a twin bed, a worn desk, the kind of place that didn't care how old you were or what regrets you brought with you. I opened the window. The street below buzzed with life. Children laughed. A couple kissed by the fountain. The Duomo loomed in the distance like a sleeping guardian. I sat at the desk and opened my postcard case. This one had sunflowers on it. I bought it 5 years ago at a flea market for 50 cents. I thought I'd use it for decoration. Now, I used it for truth. Dear David, I began. I made it to Florence, alone, and I'm not dead yet. I stared at the words, then let the rest flow from a place I hadn't touched in decades. I walked to a cafe today. The man there didn't speak English, but he smiled at me like I belonged. I drank a cappuccino that tasted like forgiveness. I watched a woman paint in the square. I remembered what it felt like to be interesting. I paused. I am not broken, David. I am just finally free. I signed it, put a stamp on it, and promised myself I'd mail it in the morning. The cafe was small and tucked between 2 bookstores. The smell of strong coffee and fresh bread pulled me in like a spell. The owner was a man named Luca. He was in his 70s, wore suspenders, and had a twinkle in his eye that reminded me of Harold in the early years. He handed me a pastry and pointed to a table by the window. "You American?" he asked in slow, careful English. "Yes," I smiled. "First time." "Ah," he said, tapping his chest. "Big heart, small fear. That is the way." We talked in pieces, half English, half gestures, but somehow, I felt more heard than I had in years. When I told him I was traveling alone, his eyes widened. "Brave woman," he said. I shook my head. "Not brave, just tired of being told I can't." He lifted his cup to not can't. I laughed. Before I left, I asked where the post office was. He pointed me down the alley and smiled. "Send them something to talk about." I dropped the postcard in the red box with both hands, like I was releasing a bird. Back home, I pictured Marissa opening the mail. I saw David holding the card, reading the words. I wondered what they'd say. Maybe nothing, maybe everything, but I knew one thing. Now I had walked across an ocean of doubt and landed in a place where no one called me too old. I was no longer waiting to be chosen. I had already chosen myself. Paris greeted me with gray skies and golden lights, the kind that makes even the puddles shimmer. I checked into a 5th-floor walk-up near Montmartre. No elevator, but I didn't mind the stairs. Every step reminded me I still had strength left in these bones. The window in my room opened to the street below, flower boxes, stone railings, lovers arguing in fast French. I sat with my elbows on the windowsill and let the breeze carry my thoughts. Down the block, an old woman painted on the sidewalk. Her hands moved like music, bold strokes, deep blues. She wore a red scarf and smoked a thin cigarette. I watched her for 2 days before I worked up the courage to speak. Her name was Sabine. She was 72 and had painted in that same spot every day since her husband died 12 years ago. He never understood why I painted. She told me, now he's gone, and I finally do it every day. I asked her if she ever felt guilty for choosing herself. She looked me straight in the eye and said, women like us, we don't fade, we become. I wrote that down in my journal that night. We don't fade, we become. And in that small room with peeling paint and a crooked lamp, I started to feel like I was becoming. 2. I walked past the art supply shop and saw a postcard rack spinning gently in the breeze. I stopped. One card caught my eye, brush strokes of lavender and a pale blue sky. The Eiffel Tower rising in the background like a dream. It reminded me of Ellie. She used to paint with me when she was little. Finger paints, mostly. Swirls and suns, and big red hearts, but she had talent. She once drew our garden in spring, and I'd saved it for years in my nightstand drawer, until Marissa told her to stop wasting time and focus on something real. Business, numbers, practical things. That day, Ellie put her brushes away and never picked them back up. Now I held the postcard to my chest like a memory. Back at the room, I wrote slowly, Dear Ellie, Paris is full of color. Light spills from windows. Art lives in the cracks of old bricks. You don't need permission to be yourself. Not from your mother, not from your father, not even from me. I paused. I saw a woman painting on the street. She reminded me of you. You are still her. You are still the girl who saw magic in flowers and faces. Don't let them make you gray. I stared at the words, hoping they'd reach past the walls built around her. I signed it, sealed it, and walked it to the blue postbox on the corner, back home. Maybe it would land in her hands. Maybe she'd read it under the covers. Maybe she'd cry, or maybe she'd remember, but I didn't need to know just yet. Sometimes you send love out into the world with no guarantee, and sometimes that's enough. Berlin was colder than Florence and quieter than Paris. The buildings stood tall and gray like they were holding secrets. The history clung to the air, heavy but honest. I walked slowly, hands buried deep in my coat pockets, unsure if I belonged here. The hostel was a last-minute booking, shared kitchen, bunk beds, young people laughing late into the night. I felt ancient walking in with my suitcase and floral scarf, like a ghost from another time, but no one stared. In fact, they smiled. One young man with long hair and chipped nail polish opened the door for me and said, Welcome, Oma. He grinned. That means grandma. I laughed. Then you better behave. I met people from everywhere: Brazil, Japan, Ireland. They cooked together, shared stories, helped each other find bus routes. It was chaotic and warm and deeply human. At breakfast, a quiet girl named Miko sat beside me. She wore headphones, but took them off when I poured her tea. You travel alone? She asked. Yes, I said, smiling. For the first time. She nodded. Me too. My mom passed last year. She always wanted to see Europe, so I'm seeing it for both of us. We sat in silence for a moment, two strangers bound by grief and courage. Later that night, Miko gave me a paper crane. For strength, she whispered. I kept it in my coat pocket. It stayed warm there. That evening, the common room was full of noise and music. Someone played guitar. Another read poetry out loud. The radiator hissed. Laughter bounced off the walls. I was surprised how easily I blended in. We played cards. We shared wine. They asked me questions, real ones, about my childhood, my husband, my favorite music. They wanted to know me. A girl with pink hair said, You remind me of my grandma. She was badass, too. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Nobody here asked me if I was sure I could travel alone. Nobody tried to shrink me. Nobody rolled their eyes when I spoke. They leaned in. They listened. I hadn't felt so seen in decades. When I went back to my room, I pulled out another postcard. This one had a city skyline, sharp and cold but beautiful. It felt like Berlin. I didn't write to David or Ellie this time. I wrote to myself again. Dear me, you don't need permission. You don't need to prove anything. You're allowed to take up space in the world. I paused, then added, You're not lost. You're just finally showing up. I dropped it in the mailbox the next morning, with a quiet kind of pride. I no longer needed a witness to my life. I had become one. Back in the States, my postcards began to arrive one by one. Florence, Paris, Berlin. I imagined the mail slot clinking open, the cards sliding to the floor like tiny rebellions. I wondered who picked them up first. Marissa probably. She always checked the mail before David got home. I could almost see her face, lips pressed tight, reading my words like poison. Ellie found the Paris card. She told me later. She was home for the weekend, passing through the living room when she noticed the postcard lying upside down on the coffee table. She picked it up and read the back. Her mother said nothing, just clicked her tongue and went back to scrolling her phone. Why didn't Grandma tell me she was in Paris? Ellie asked. She's being dramatic, Marissa replied, running around Europe like she's 20. She'll come crawling back when she gets tired. Ellie didn't answer. Instead, she quietly took the postcard and slipped it into her bag. Later, that night, she found the others tucked in a drawer. Florence, Berlin, all of them addressed to someone in the house, none of them proudly displayed. It was as if my journey had become a secret no one wanted to admit, but Ellie kept the postcards anyway. She started pinning them on the corkboard in her bedroom, one by one. And for the first time in years, she began to remember the girl she used to be. Meanwhile, David was starting to unravel. He'd tell himself he didn't care, but I knew the signs, the clipped phone calls, the long silences at dinner, the way he avoided looking at the fridge where I used to leave family notes. One night, he finally asked, did she seriously go to Germany? Marissa folded laundry with sharp hands. She's off her rocker. David, she needs supervision, not stamps. She could get hurt, he muttered. She's already hurting us, she snapped, running away like this, making a show of it. What are people supposed to think? What people? Our friends, the family. She's making us look like we abandoned her. David didn't reply right away. He stared at the floor, brow furrowed. Maybe part of him wondered if that was exactly what they'd done. Later that week, Marissa Googled my name. She found my photos. Me standing by the Seine, laughing in Florence, dancing barefoot in a market in Seville. Some I'd posted myself. Others were tagged by strangers. I met Miko, Sabine, even Luca. I wasn't just traveling, I was living. She's gone rogue, Marissa hissed. David just stared at the screen. Ellie, watching from the hallway, whispered to herself, she's just finally living. I wasn't there to hear it, but if I had been, I would have smiled, because cracks had started to form in the picture frame they'd trapped me in, and I wasn't going back into it. Morocco was my 12th stop. I hadn't planned it, but something about the sound of it called to me. Marrakesh, a name like poetry. The sun here touched everything with gold. Even the shadows glowed. I wandered the souk in the early mornings, wrapped in a light scarf, drinking mint tea that burned sweet on my tongue. I bartered for spices I couldn't name. I got lost more than once, but I never felt afraid. I sat under a fig tree near the market and watched a little boy chase a balloon across the square. His mother smiled at me, and I smiled back. It was in that moment I realized something. I had sent 11 postcards, one from each place I visited, but I hadn't sent the most important one. Not to David, not to Ellie, not even to Marissa. This one wasn't for anyone else. This one was for me. Back in my room, I took out my final postcard. It was blank, simple, a cream-colored card with soft edges. I'd been saving it without even knowing why. I sat on the bed, pen in hand, and let the words come. Dear me, I began. You did it. You got on the plane. You crossed oceans. You let go of fear and guilt and everyone else's expectations. I paused. You found strangers who treated you like family. You made friends with people who saw you not as someone fading, but as someone beginning. You danced. You cried. You wrote your own story. My hand shook, but I kept writing. I'm proud of you. I hadn't said those words to myself in a lifetime. I sealed the postcard and stared at it for a long time. Then I addressed it to my own home, the place I hadn't seen in months. I wanted it waiting for me when I returned, a reminder that this wasn't a dream, it had been real. I walked the narrow street to the nearest postbox and dropped it in like a prayer. The sun was setting behind the rooftops, and the call to prayer rose through the air like a hymn. I closed my eyes. 12 countries, 12 messages, and one final truth. I had become everything they said I couldn't be. When I stepped off the plane, the sky back home looked dull, flat, like it had forgotten how to shine. The airport was noisy, full of people moving too fast. I took my time. No one was there to greet me. No welcome home sign. No flowers. But I didn't expect that. I took a cab to my house. Everything looked the same, the crooked mailbox, The rose bush, I thought, had died last winter. Even the faded doormat that said, "Bless this mess." I stood on the porch with my suitcase in one hand and my key in the other. Got inside. The air smelled stale, like silence had been living here in my place. I opened the fridge, empty except for expired yogurt and a shriveled lemon. I set my bag down and sat in my favorite chair, the one no one ever wanted when they visited. It felt like mine again. That night, David came by. He didn't knock. He let himself in with the key I never took back. He stood there in the doorway, arms folded, unsure what to say. "You're back," he muttered, double quotes. "Yes." Done being dramatic. I looked at him, my son, now more stranger than child, and smiled. "No, I'm done being invisible." The next morning, I found the postcard on the floor, the 12th one, the one I had sent to myself from Morocco. I picked it up and read my own handwriting. "Dear me, I'm proud of you." I held it to my chest like a heartbeat and cried, not because I was sad, but because I finally understood something. The journey wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about remembering who I'd always been. Later that afternoon, Ellie knocked on the door. She stood there in a paint-stained hoodie, holding a rolled-up piece of paper. "Grandma," she said, "I applied to art school." I stared at her, speechless. "Your postcard," she whispered. It made me want to find myself again. I hugged her so tight I thought I'd fall apart. We sat on the porch, sunlight spilling through the trees. She showed me her sketches. She asked about Florence, about Paris, about everything. And I told her everything, as we laughed. I noticed something new in her eyes, freedom. When she got up to leave, I handed her my travel journal. "Take it," I said. "Start yours." She looked at me, tearful. "What if I get scared?" "Good," I said. "Pack light." That night, I looked at the wall where old family photos once hung. I took down the ones that felt like ghosts and replaced them with postcards. 12 countries, one woman, and a truth I had earned 1 mile at a time. The return is not a surrender, it's a coronation.